My name is John Carroll. I'm the CEO and founder of the Service Council. Welcome to today's webinar, Remote Support Reimagined, Elevating Support from the Contact Center to the Field. I am so incredibly pleased to be joined today by Brad Haberly. Brad is the Executive Vice President of Services at Smart Infrastructure Buildings at Siemens. Brad is a board member of the Service Council. Thank you so much for joining the Vanna White Wave. Hi, Brad. Welcome. We've also got Chris Savio. Chris is the Senior Director of Product Marketing from LogMeIn, go-to, if you will. Really important partner of the Service Council. Thank you for joining today's discussion, Chris, and thank you for bringing today's webinar to the group. I'm also joined by my colleague, Gerardo Pelayo. Gerardo is the VP of Research and Advisory, and he'll be reflecting, reacting. He'll actually be moderating our Q&A as we get to the interactive session, and really pleased to be joined by Gerardo. Want to make today's webinar as interactive as possible. We always encourage our listenership to be involved in the discussion, chat, react, submit questions. So please use that as freely as you'd like to. Our group here has agreed to read and react to whatever comes in. So we'll create an Ask Me Anything type concept here. Today's webinar is going to be recorded. If you'd like to revisit it and share it with colleagues or just revisit it yourself, it will be accessible, and our team here will be communicating its availability here very shortly after today's webinar. So why don't we go ahead and get things kicked off here? This is going to be 60 minutes here, and we've got ultimately 3 sections. We've got a little bit of motivating discussion around the research trends that we're finding. Then behind that, we have Brad has agreed to share a little bit of Siemens' journey. So he'll take us through a discussion. And then behind that, Chris and Brad and myself and Gerardo will walk through an interactive Q&A session that will talk about some of the pertinent issues that are still unsolved, if you will. So let's go ahead and get things kicked off. Today's webinar, again, is being recorded. That resource will be available to you. We've also, LogMeIn was kind enough to share a couple of case studies that address this critical topic that are available here. You could take out your QR code scanner, launch your phone, and access those resources if you'd care to dig deeper and have some additional literature on the topic. So a great case study on Arise and a great case study on Lenovo, 2 great companies. So please, I'd encourage you to access those. So when we look at research as an organization, there's a framework and a methodology that we have. We look at common practices, we look at best practices, and we look at next practices. And sometimes the common practices are not necessarily next practices, right? They just might be common. They might be the most common thing that's being addressed, or the more common pressure that's being faced, or something common in practice that's being deployed. Sometimes it could be, that those ones that are less common are inconsequential, and other times it could be that they've already been solved, right? So our trained eye, everybody on the listenership, goes right towards the top 3 responses on our data charts. And it's always good to do that, right? That's what the common body of work, that's what the common community that's responding to the survey is suggesting are critical. But those ones that are down on the bottom are not to be completely omitted. So as we look at the data, as we go through here, I just want to encourage you to think about flipping the data chart on its head and looking at it as a pyramid rather than just a inverted pyramid. So we're going to be reflecting on the 2024 State of Remote Support research data. You can see here a great body of work, some great responding companies, very vast industry representation, representation from all market segments in terms of size of company, as well as geo. So it's about a 1/3, 1/3, 1/3 split across the world in terms of representation of North America versus EMEA versus APJ. APJ is a little bit less than 1/3, but we do get a really strong representation from an industry perspective, from a geo perspective. And we asked, excuse me, I'm going to back up. I flashed, I don't want to lead you here. Actually, before we get to that, I'd like to launch our first poll. I'd like to create an interactive environment here. And Lauren, my trusty colleague, what are the biggest impediments to your remote support journey? So as you think about your remote support journey, whether you're launched, considering launching, wherever you are in that maturity pathway, what are the biggest impediments to scaling remote support? and we'll leave this open here. You can see some of the answer choices. Now that's a first. I have a webinar participant who sent a AI bot that is capturing, will be proactively commenting and snapshotting the discussion back to us. So this is cool. We've got agentic AI right inside today's webinar. How amazing is that? So we'll leave this poll open and we can shut it down, read and react here. Lauren, if we could shut that down and see what the data is suggesting to us. All right. So 46% said managing complex customer requirements, the product sophistication is the most critical challenge. Following that, 1/3 of you expressed the integration of remote support with other service delivery channels as a challenge. I completely hear that pain. The journey from remote to field is a real critical one. And we're going to talk a little bit about that. And then the third answer choice here was we had turning remote support into a revenue growth driver. I love seeing that because there is some research data that we'll review here in just a moment that suggests that the journey to revenue optimization, where remote support is being placed in terms of its intention, currently speaking, is not towards that customer revenue creation, that proactive, predictive methodology that we all aim to achieve. So let's go ahead and journey through our webinar further here. And we actually asked this question in the State of the Remote Support Survey. What are the biggest challenges currently facing? The need to support a large variety of equipment and products was number one. So same answer choice as the group here. Number two was an interesting one because what empowers, what aids in the remote support channel being effective is intelligence from asset lifecycle, asset health. What is the customer instance? That intelligence can fuel a greater level of understanding of the situation so that you can predict, proactively serve and support so that you can avoid those dispatch scenarios. Adapting, building, and adapting to IoT capabilities into the legacy equipment was one of the critical challenges here represented in the data. Preventing unnecessary dispatch and truck rolls, number three. We still see average first-time fix rates somewhere between 75 and 85% year over year, according to our KPIs research. That means that somewhere between 15 and 25% of issues that come into a remote support setting are resulting in that transition to a field dispatch. And it also means that there is call deflection isn't happening that commonly, but what also isn't happening that commonly is the first time fix rate that's happening in the field, right? You've got a number of no fault found scenarios. We continue to hear somewhere around 20%, 1 in 5 field dispatches result in a no fault found. That's high. That's really high. So how can we get more effective in the middle of those two channels, those two really critical channels? We'll talk a little bit more about that. I talked about who are the end users of remote support, and right now it's placed and really centered on internal technical teams serving as a support mechanism, a knowledge base for those internal technical teams. Product-based support with no service revenue attached to it. But we continue to see some of the more progressive organizations that have begun to journey down this path with customers where they're starting to monetize it and not just create that operational capability that's effective in a remote support setting, but how can we build that into service level agreements and premium level agreements. Does remote support have its own profit and loss? 7 out of 10 say that it doesn't, right? So 3 out of 10 say that there's an intention to. 7% are confused, but about 1 in 5 or 1 in 4 suggest that they intend to, right? So there's intention to monetize. There is a growth mindset in terms of support and service, but we're just not realizing that to date. And so that's where we are. That's where the community is with respect to remote support. We also talk about remote support, and remote support isn't a singular channel. Remote support is omni-channel. It's complex. So the mention of journeying cross channel, I think that was the number three response from today's listenership, is a real critical one because you've got FAQs, knowledge base, you've got chat, you've got live call center support, you've got, gosh, the channels just keep going on and on. Remote support is omnichannel. And there is a journey that customers and teams need to, journey across in terms of following the customer and meeting the customer where they are. And the what gets really tricky, the second line of defense behind the remote support channel, when we do in fact dispatch and result in a dispatch scenario, we've got this real tricky in the middle moment here of triage and diagnosis. How can we effectively triage and diagnose the issue so that we're not arriving with no fault found scenarios? We're arriving with the right person from a skill set perspective. We're provisioning and serving up the right parts that are required for that scenario. So, costs can really, really inflate when you don't triage and diagnose the issue effectively, or when you don't remotely resolve the issue. Dispatch costs, we all know the cost of dispatch is, up and to the right in terms of fuel costs, in terms of time spent, labor, total churn. You've got, if you don't dispatch and effectively triage, oftentimes you have to shotgun parts. Parts shotgunning has become really commonly talked about in terms of, oh gosh, we sent the technician out and they don't have the right part. So there's a lot of challenges with respect to that middle moment. It's a critical part of the journey transitioning from remote support over to a field service environment. And I'm actually going to talk about how intelligence here can actually inform this process. So why don't we launch our second poll here and get the feedback from our listenership here. And we want to talk about how have you adopted AI in your support organization? Because intelligence is really infusing this process. We hear a lot about endeavor to create an agentic AI situation where we've got agents that are technical in nature that are talking. We've got an AI bot here today taking notes and communicating with us. So how is that being infused into the remote support journey, into the customer experience journey? So we'll leave this poll open here and want to understand where you are with respect to your AI adoption. And we'll shut this down in 3, 2, 1 and react to the discussion. And so we have no, we have not adopted AI, but we're considering it. So half of you are in that mindset of we need to know more about it. We need to understand it in order to journey down that path. Yes, to support agents, so internally. Yes, to support both agents and customers was number 3 answer choice at certainly a minority part of you signaling that at only about 11%, 10%, 1 out of 10. So there's room to grow with respect to journeying down this path of operational execution and capability in a remote support setting. And really, at the end of the day, we think that this whole shift left can become a triple threat for your organization. If you look at the cost optimization opportunity, the dispatch avoidance, the call deflection, that can be considerable. And that middle moment of effective triage and diagnosis, when and where you can't remotely support, that's another critical part of this journey, so that when you do dispatch, you don't have inflated costs. This whole revenue orientation, we're starting to see these capabilities be monetized, predictive and proactive services and support. It's certainly trailing the operational capabilities by a large amount, probably about 30%. But we still see that service leaders have this growth mindset. That was the answer that we got from a majority of service leaders in our service leader agenda survey, is that this growth mindset is really a big part of the storyline this year in terms of the service leader agenda. And then lastly, experience, right? The experience can be effective, right? There's an unhappy face there. I'd like to turn that frown upside down and make it happy, because there is an opportunity where remote support and shift left can become the great enabler to happiness and effective customer journeys, as well as create scenarios where intelligence is making the effort to support customers, whether it be remote or in the field, easier. because of intelligence, because of effective triage and diagnosis, because of all the things we're talking about. Our current state of the remote support survey is in market. There's a QR code there that we'd love to have your voice represented. I'm going to go ahead and transition here and bring in Brad to the discussion. Brad is an advisory board member of the Service Council. Brad, I want to allow you to introduce yourself. So why don't we turn things over to you and welcome you to the discussion.
Thanks, John, and hope everyone can hear me well. I'm in Chicago, a nice cold Chicago day. I run the global service business for one of Siemens business, Siemens Smart Infrastructure, in our building space. We're in approximately 20 direct countries around the world and a lot of other countries with partners. We have about 11,000 technicians around the world that execute our services every day. And we're providing services on systems that run buildings, electrical systems, HVAC systems, control systems, security systems, and fire alarm systems and other systems that we provide services around the world, and been in the industry for a long time. And this journey of using technology to deliver remote and using AI has been the journey we've been on for a while, and had lots of experience from that, and really critical to delivering better services for our customers. And then just to share a little bit on the Siemens journey, when it comes to this, is the ability, if you look at this is the structure that we've been going through on our digitalization strategy. Traditional, I'll just go from the traditional all the way, the farthest end of the right, we had a traditional business for many years where we do on-site services. And what would happen is someone would call up, we roll a truck, we have a huge amount of contracts that we do, preventative maintenance, reactive maintenance, and a lot of times comprehensive, where we'll cover the whole equipment and services. Something's broke or fixed, it's covered under our contract, so we fix it, and it's a cost of us. Biggest value is keeping that systems up and running, and if something breaks, the experience to react to that. And then the farthest end of this is where our journey is right now in the middle of the process is autonomous. Is we're basically running analytics on buildings. We're seeing how that building's performing. We're then making some triage decisions. Triage might go back to remote, where we fix it remote. We might roll a truck. We might just give workflow to our customers' internal organizations into their workflow, and they might fix that. So that complexity of that is really critical. The key on that, and it really started all under, when you look at semi-automatic buildings and remote, that was the first phase that we started in our digital journey. And it starts with connectivity, which is the biggest challenge. You got to connect some way into your customer site and have ability to view and do something with, and that's the biggest challenge. And we started with doing basically remote resolution, which was a huge value. And it's a monetization strategy and a customer value strategy, because remember what I said, our customer, one of the biggest values, they wanted the system to be working, but if it broke, they wanted someone to fix it. So they would pay us a premium if it was 4 hours versus 24 hours versus a 2-day response time. Inside remote, we can respond 5-10 minutes, fix it a high percentage of the time, so we can improve that value to them, which is really what they wanted. But also because they're full comprehensive contracts, a lot of them, that was a cost of us that we put in the contract with a certain amount of time on there. So if we can reduce our time, it monetizes it for us and it monetizes it for them. It's a win-win. And that's really the journey. And that's the process we're doing and working on. And last thing I would state about that is many experiences, but we have a field-based local organization, and then we have a remote structure that does all the stuff from the right to left, from autonomous buildings. To be able to do that is we build a group called Digital Service Center, which today makes up about 8% of our workforce, which was zero about 7 years ago, that does all the remote technology and not roll trucks. We still have a huge amount of stuff we do with rolling trucks and doing projects that we do, because we have physical things that still break, but the value we provide is substantial. So that's the journey we've been on.
Brad, I got a quick question for you. Follow up on that remote or the digital service center. You said it's 8% now representation of your workforce. what is the intended destination? Where does that go from here in terms of growth? Is that on its path, or where do you think that will land?
Yeah, it's our fastest portion of our operational growth is what's happening because our new growth for business has been on that right-hand side.
Yeah.
And so that part's growing rapidly. If you would have went probably 4 years ago, it's 200 people. So
Wow.
it's growing and they're distributed around the world. We have some hubs in different places, but we've taken the philosophy, right or wrong, when the customer interaction, the direct customer interaction, when we're talking to customers, we're keeping that local with local countries for language and knowledge. And we have hubs to handle other activities out there. So it's a distributed organization around the
Yeah.
world, run from an individual that works for me that runs that whole portion of the business, but completely set up and structured, that are tied into our full workflow because if it's done
Yeah.
remote from our local organization, it all has to be done in a flawless way for our customers.
So it's scaling up. Outstanding. We had a great comment from one of our listening audience members, Richard Albanese. Rich says another key is the communication between remote agent and technician for effective handoff of the customer problem. Rich, I couldn't agree more. And you bring up a point here that I think is really important. We keep hearing about the journey to AI, the technical transformation, digital transformations, digitization of everything. And what we keep on harping or really doubling down on is the importance of the human workflow and the technical workflow, and how do they come together in parallel to work in harmony, not one superseding the other, right? So there is an effective, we're seeing some organizations handle this better where they're marrying these two things together in a way that's makes it effective in a win-win scenario. It's not one or the other. It's not because of AI we're going to displace humans. It's both. It's and, not or. Great comment. Thank you for the comment. Brad, thank you for your discussion on your business. I'm sure there's more questions from our listening audience and our panelists, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to transition to our Q&A structure here, and Gerardo might have a motivating question before getting into our Q&A back and forth here on the story that you just led us through. But if he doesn't, we'll go jump right in and take things away. Gerardo, over to you.
Yes, yes, indeed. And I think this is a good bridge actually, because as Brad, you were walking us through the different possibilities in the value chain, one of the trends that we see is as we see the complexity growing in terms of expectations, that has called for a higher need to have a connection across the entire service value chain. And across everything that is possible in what you mentioned, there's always a driver, and there's the question of why should we apply this, not just because we can, but because we should. So there's different perspectives on this. Some research from Harvard Business Review says 63% of the customers prefer to have a live chat interaction. 81% want to do a do-it-yourself. And then what we learned through our own research is that remote support organizations very often are not able to predict and anticipate why their remote support demand is happening. What are the questions that are coming in? So how do you go around this question? What do you think is driving the popularity and the higher focus on the remote support operation?
So the question is to me, right?
Yes.
Yeah. A couple things on there is, in our experience, is customers were not the driver. And then I'll talk about capacity of this thing, because customers have the same problem that they've always had, like in our world. So they have systems that they want to run and optimize in the most cheapest, most efficient way. They have, for us, it's uptime. Like if you have a data center, you got to have your electrical infrastructure uptime, or a hospital, you want to make sure your operating room. So the same problems have occurred. It just, there's a more efficient way to go do that, and we can make improvements in that through the digitalization. Because what you have now is you have systems that can see what's happening. You have metrics. You can see actually how you're doing against them because you can do reporting, and you can actually show outcomes versus traditionally what we did is we did preventative maintenance, and when something broke, we did a react on there. So it's a very reactive, and preventive maintenance was just trying to fix that. Now we can do directive preventative maintenance because we can see where problems occur before they occur, but the same customer problems on that. Now the remote capability occurs because the technology has enabled that in an efficient way. I think that's really what it is. And it's just a more efficient way to go deliver that than we delivered it in the past. And the capacity of that, I think it changes on a couple of things. Number one, you normally have a normal capacity that used to, there's a certain amount of calls that come in. The difference in the past, for us, we would have rolled a truck. Now we can route that to a remote center or digital service center. We know they fix that X amount of percentage of time, so our truck rolls go down, and so our capacity changes to our digital service center versus our field services, and how much under capacity or capacity you need to do, and you need to manage that capacity management on site. But then when you start to use machine learning and other things, then it's depending on the workflow, then that creates a whole different level of work that a remote specialist can do, and do it in a more efficient way that you'll dispatch that or your customers. And then the third piece that we've seen that has added huge capacity to our digital centers is, in the past, we would send a technician out. And if you actually watch what they would do, they had a preventative maintenance routine, but they would first go talk to the customer. The customer would have a list of problems that they had they've been waiting for them to show up to fix. And then what they would do is they would literally get on their laptops, they would connect to a system, and they would run a diagnostics. And that would take, maybe they drink coffee with the customer and run their diagnostics for 45 minutes, an hour, and then that would direct a little bit of their activities. We do all that through machines are happening today. Then we have someone looking at and then providing that information to the technician. So it's capacity management, again, depending on what your workflow, and you need to build that up over time and understand where that work capacity happens, and you just start building up that capacity in a different way. I don't know if that answers, but that's why I said it's driven by different things that are driving that demand. But I think it's more internal than external. I think the external is the exact same thing. It's just a better way to do that.
Yeah, and if I extrapolate that a little bit, I would say that there's a lot of decisions that have changed because of this possibility. So you talked about planning for how much capacity I need to have in the remote support operation, but there's also the incentives that go into play. It used to be how quickly you wrap up the call, for example, and now it may be, are you able to resolve the call and prevent a dispatch in some of the scenarios as you're mentioning. And so as you think of, should we prevent people from reaching out to the remote support operation, anticipate it, and see what capabilities we need to have, what training we need to provide the agents, how to efficiently react, having the right mechanisms to do this. Chris, I'd like to welcome you into the discussion for this and see what are you seeing in the industry as across these different possibilities, from responding to the demand versus trying to shape how some of that demand from technical support or customers comes in. Do you see a greater focus in either side of it?
Yeah, no, that's great, and I completely agree, Brad, with what you were saying. I mean, I think that, the rise of popularity in support is provider driven. I think for a few different reasons. One, I think, is just the complexity with which the technology that's being supported, right? I think organizations in, manufacturing or software providers or anything that you're putting out from a service standpoint has put out things that are more complex, more technically integrated with other systems that makes resolving these things potentially by the end user, your customers or whatever, more difficult to do, right? And as documentation and self-service flows and things like that have improved, they haven't, in my mind, have kept up with the complexity of the problems, right? And what this has done, and we've seen with our customers, it compounds, right? When people are getting to the point of the support experience, your SLAs are kind of blown out the window, right? Your handle times are much longer because there's much more complicated situations, right? The initial triage has been self-served. To your point, 81% are doing a lot of these things themselves. And so the technology and problems that are reaching these organizations have as a result, just gotten more difficult for an L1 person to service, right? And the knowledge gap, the turnover of these people, they're just not at that level. I mean, we see it just in the technology we provide when we get call center support for some of our services, that L1 reps are not the same ones that you would have had 20 years ago. They have to be much more savvy, much more skilled, and can't just comb a few basic knowledge articles because your user have done it. And so in my mind, these are things that service organizations, they need to start to anticipate, right? And I think there's a play for the assisted AI part of it, that was speaking to maybe level these things up. But yeah, I mean, it's your own bed that you've kind of made at this point, and you have users that are willing to try and service and troubleshoot these things, much more technologically savvy than, generations ago. But we've just made it more confusing and more complicated. And now you just have to figure out, right, with working through good UX, understanding your user experience, your digital journeys around, okay, where can we maybe inject something else that maybe does some analysis or diagnostics on its own before getting to a technician, right? Or something like that to maybe arm that first agent they're going to get there with more information right before maybe that session starts or conversation occurs.
So in making sense out of this complexity that Chris brings up, and um, we can move to the next question, because John introduced this concept of remote support in itself is an omni-channel. You have all these different resources that can come together, that can be leveraged, and if not done properly, they can cause more confusion rather than value. So above and beyond the concept, Brad, I would ask you, where have you faced the greater challenges in putting this picture together from a remote support perspective?
Yeah, lots of challenges here. Okay, and I'll start with some of the basics early on. Is we would have traditionally we would have a call into our call center and they would route a truck, and then we were trying to now route it to our DSC, and so that was the first thing we had to do is to fix. And so we had to make sure in our systems that we knew which systems we were connected to. And we had a strategy once there's connectivity, it's automatically routed to the DSC because they can fix that versus a call handler who dispatches. So we had to not only put that in our system, but we had to build that into our internal iBase that we knew exactly which systems and which customers. And we had to build that into our operational systems that make that process work really cleanly. But the other side of that, which you guys mentioned before, then the complexity then goes to now you fix something or didn't fix something. How do you get that information to the technician? Okay. And so they have to log that information to our digital service center. And then that information, if they don't fix that, and even if they fixed it, the next time they go on a call, you want to make that, you had to make sure that that information gets routed and gets passed back to that. And they have a history of that stuff. So we didn't have that right at first, and it got really messy and really difficult. And then there was just normal resistance early on, even from our local offices, to move that to the centers because they wanted to keep their people busy versus not. So we had to force that behavior with metrics and drive and vice versa. So that's the first phase, and you have to kind of build that institutionalize into your maintenance plans, into your tasking, into your routing systems. It all has to be thought through in all those details, otherwise it doesn't work. And then when you get into now you do machine learning and you're doing analytics, that even gets more complicated on there because then in above site we call preventative maintenance because you have to do work at a certain time that has to be dispatched. For example, if we have a technician that's going out on this date, a week before, we'll kick off the digital side of that. They'll run the analytics, do that, provide that information and report, give it to technicians so it's packaged up for them. When they walk on that job, they have that. All that has to be built into workflow. So your workflow and your end-to-end process and your tool chain has to completely change. That's difficult. I can tell you, every time we add something new, that gets even more complicated. And there's a lot of pieces that can break into that in quality. And all you do is break one of them, and you really then cause the customer interaction and difficult. So each step you got to think those things through and think through your workflow, and it's not easy. It's very difficult, as I tell you.
Yeah, and not to make anybody panic, but Tom Yellow brings another layer into the conversation of that complexity, which is third-party service providers. So you have to engage. What does that interface look like? And he's asking specifically in your case, Brad, does Siemens leverage third-party service providers? And if so, how does that affect the interactions you were just talking about?
We do in certain countries. It's not a strategy that we deploy, so it's not as done. And what we've done, and we're not as good at this as possible, is what we've done is we give them access to our field operations system. So when the information, just like we give a technician, they have their own site that they have to log the calls and they get that information that looks a little bit like the same thing. That's how we've done that. But it's not a big portion of our business, so it hasn't been a big focus for us.
I just
Got
had a
it.
quick comment on some of the conversation, Gerardo, if I could just infuse it, because I love this chat so far around how, in a lot of ways, we're rewriting the book right now in terms of process workflows, right? The complexity, or the removal of complexity with some of these new technologies that are making information more accessible, and how that is changing the dynamic of how do we measure success in a remote support setting versus a field-based setting. It used to be average call time handling. To what degree does that get thrown out the window in terms of quality of experience when you start to have level one engineers remotely resolving issues that might take longer on an experience, right? So I think that this is just a really interesting point in time as we reinvent service and the workflows around execution with all these new capabilities. And Brad, you just hit on that in terms of, if one link in the chain is broken, then it can really have a trickle down effect and cause, a state of disarray. So I really appreciate the viewpoints here. I think it's great. So back to you, Gerardo.
Yep. So, Chris, I'd also like to get your perspective as you have these conversations across your customers. What are some of the best practices or perhaps gotcha moments that you've observed regarding this omni-channel structure? Sorry.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. I mean, I think the biggest challenge I've heard from a lot of our customers is the amount of data like available for them to sort through, right? As they're trying to provide a level of service, whether reactive or proactive, everything from, systems that you have deployed to CRM data to past experiences, right? There that a human is trying to comb through to understand when someone has an issue or something's breaking or whatever it is, right? Whether it's someone you're sending out into the field or someone that's on the line with the chat or on a call with someone, right? So being able to figure out how to sort through that to understand, what was a past experience, what was done previously, what do I have to do now without needing to kind of redo things that were in the past, right? I think that's probably one of the biggest issues, the amount of data and just information available for people. That's with a lot of these connected systems, right? I think previously one of it was actually getting these systems to connect well. I think a lot of organizations have gotten past that, but now there's just such a flow of data and information that is just hard to understand. Okay, where's the thing I'm trying to tackle here? And then the last piece, which is even with in my mind some of this connections, I think it's that kind of personalized experience and journey from one stage of the support experience to the other, right? If you're starting and shifting way left and level 0 self-service up to maybe field service, keeping kind of a personalized experience, like your customer thinks it's working with that same organization regardless of who they're talking to. And so you have to kind of treat them that way, and having these proper handoffs from one rep to the other to another, right? And I think this was mentioned earlier on, is really important, right? And or else they're starting from square one again. And John, you're spot on. I think handle time is something that at this point is thrown out the window. One thing whenever I talk to customers is that they should be measuring is their customer effort score, right? Myself, if something's going to take me a week to get solved, great. If I didn't have to do a lot in that solution, even better, right? Like I would rather it then than I'm have to be hands on for 2 days and get it solved then. So couldn't agree more with that.
It's just,
Yep.
can I add to Chris's things real quick? I think a great comment is when he talked about the amount of information, I think it's true. That's right now what we're using first phases of some of the AI internally is just basically summarizing that information. We have massive information, hit a button and it will summarize it. And we're seeing that in multiple things because that's exactly, we're digging through screens and we can get a summary. It can get them to react. So that's some of the early stuff on there that we're seeing, I think is really important in the human eyes. And I think Chris's point is really important there too. And I just say a tactic that we did, and we're not consistent around the world, but a tactic we did when we do remote support and we have to tell the customer what's happening on that right now, we send them that information. We actually have a picture of the technician. That's our remote support. And we put a picture on there to personalize it a little bit because they're used to their technicians. So we try to personalize it with people that way. So it's not some machine on there. So it's little tactical things, but he's right. There are the things you find out that customers don't like, and you got to figure out how to work around those little things are really interesting.
Yeah. Well, so one extra thing that I was thinking about when it comes to the amount of data is that this connection between remote support and field service is a two-way interaction. And we often forget that the intelligence that is collected in the field about what went wrong can actually help to drive the efficiencies and the workflows for how the remote support is provided. And that gets back to, well, are the humans, are those field service technicians capturing the data that is going to be useful upstream, and we have the right mechanisms to manage and leverage all that data to support the people at the other end of it. And that takes us to the next point, because you both mentioned these personalized experiences, and there's a sort of debate going on. We have a very fixed position on it of this human technology interaction. There's even our theme for this year's Smarter Service Executive Symposium is harnessing humanity and technology for next level service, because we think that the answer lies in the and, not an or selection between the two. But we do see and hear comments about customer loyalty being challenged and more drive towards automation. Where do you land on this debate? What are you seeing from your teams?
Um,
So Brad, I'll go to you first.
yeah, I'm probably old school on this one. So human is really critical for me. I still say the most important person in my business is my service technician that goes on site and builds that relationship with the customer. And the human aspect of that is critical. But I also see more and more kind of new generations don't actually want to have as much interaction of that, and that's where's that line of AI going to be able to provide that support versus not, and an efficiency things of what really works. So I think it's a combination of both. I don't think it's one or the other, and that's why on the human side, I told you we've kept localization of any interaction at local country because I want to keep that and try to make it very personal with the customers because of the value they provide. Because part of it's the work you do, but also it's the relationship you have and not giving that up. And you can add value just by that relationship. So I think I don't think there's a perfect answer. I think we're moving more and more. The technology can do more and more, but you got to support that with a human interaction and make that personal. I think that's the magic in this. That would be my view.
Yeah, thank you. I would tend to agree. And Chris, I'll actually merge the next question with your perspective on this. Because as we think of what technology is going to bring into the picture and how it's going to infuse that individual experience, it's not just data, it's the translating that data into intelligence, because there's all sorts of sources, from transactional data, your master data, the live telemetry that we're seeing from the assets, and there's different ways to leverage and interpret that data with the rise of AI in its different forms. So, can you not only share your perspective of how the human and technology interaction works, but what are some of the success stories that you've seen in how AI is influencing this service delivery experience?
Yeah, two great topics. I'm glad you kind of pulled this one in because I think they are obviously almost one and the same way when we're saying technology or technology advances today, right? You can't go a beat without talking about, the impact of AI. And I would agree, one of the things, Brad, that you said really resonates is for a lot of customers or people that do business, their only interaction with the business is the service team, right? And as you start to strip more and more of that away, your opportunities to delight customers and build loyalty and trust with them starts to go away as well, right? If you don't have a personal connection to a company, you're going to be pretty quick to want to switch or go somewhere else, right? And so you never want something to go wrong. But if it does, right, if you have a strong team, you want that ability to maybe delight them and you get them to stick around longer, right? They had a bad experience, you solved it for them, you kind of owned it, and you could have kind of a customer for life at that point, right? So the more you inject technology in there, while necessary to reduce costs and things like that from the service side, you know there's less opportunities maybe to cross-sell or upsell if you're looking at your service center as a maybe revenue generating organization, right, as well. So I think there is a balance, and you really have to understand your customers and what they want, right? Understanding their personas, their needs, what's their appetite for more technology and autonomous things versus that handheld, right? Because it's not, I think, one size fits all. That being said, when bringing in this idea of technology and human and the relationship between it, I was really excited to see the poll earlier on where the majority of individuals weren't just doing for customer facing, it was agent facing AI was the primary answer, I think, said there, and then a combination with both. And I think that's exactly the right way. I think where you're seeing more and more of these issues, and we said earlier on, right, is maybe this handoff from your junior L1 reps, things getting stuck there. And so the more you can level them up because they are getting burnt out, because there is high turnover, things are getting escalated in a large volume, which probably shouldn't be escalated, right? Where we've seen AI work is by enabling those agents, right? These kind of L1 ones and making them, L1.5 agents, right? If you think about it, right? Improving their access to knowledge, helping them with doing the diagnostics that they would have to do manually or don't know how to do. And that just has lots of downstream impact. Maybe more things get solved there. Or if you're handing over to a field technician, right, the right diagnostics have been done, all these other steps are done. So when you get someone on site, all these extra things don't have to get done, right? So that's the examples of where we've seen it. The other one, and I think Brad, you were alluding to something that you guys are looking at, is this almost session wrap up or combining data. So understanding what happened to your support session, what's going on these other tickets and systems, and getting rid of that idea. Like I think wrap up notes and things like that for support calls shouldn't be a human thing anymore. At this day and age, that's where AI can step in and solve that stuff. It has all this information, knows context for everything, and that's just 3 to 4 to 5 minutes on every support call that's being spent typing up notes that frankly are probably inconsistent across everyone anyway. And so solving it that way is another place where we've seen some good successes. So
Gerardo, I'm going to borrow from field service and think about the capacity issues that field service has been facing for the last several years, right? The talent shortage, being able to meet capacity in the field-based setting, and this consideration of that senior engineer is kind of the same doctor or hospital visit experience where they come at the end, but you see nurse practitioner 1, 2, and 3 before you get to the doctor. And where I see AI and intelligence impacting the remote support environment is how do we subordinate the delivery of value to the customer in the moment along that journey where it could be completely autonomous and automated. So chatbots, virtual assistants, and how can they perhaps subordinate, create a triaging and diagnosis process that gets them to the next level where there's human interaction or intervention required, where they're further down the path and there's a more effective management of the service experience from a cost perspective, but also from an informational perspective that the chatbot and the autonomous journey informs the next agent to do the things that they need to do more effectively. So that's an area that I think is worth a double click, borrowing from some of the things we learned in field service around subordination of the delivery experience. So I just wanted to make that a couple of those points. I don't know if you have any additional points, Brad or Gerardo, on that.
Just me on this topic is I think this is the topic, and how far we go with this thing and where it starts and stops is really what it is. And I'll just give you an example. Machine learning and those kind of things we've been at for a number of years. It's what we do. This generative AI has created a whole new frontier. One of the questions I have is the broader group on here. We're doing a lot of stuff right now with generative AI and testing it, and I see some huge value. What we can't figure out is how to get that value driving out of our P&L, not make it just nice to have, but actually turn it into monetization and productivity and cost savings, and really get that measurement is where we're trying to get to, because how these investments start to pay off is really critical. That's just a question I have back to the group. Anything help would be great on that. And I'll just give you a couple examples. I think we're using it not as much of our agents assist. We're using it for our technicians in our field. We have a lot of new technicians, especially in the U.S. There was turnover was a lot for the last couple of years, and getting them the information they need to troubleshoot and triage has been a huge value. I told you about the stuff for the summary, and I'll give you another example, which is a simple example, but really important is our technicians, when they close out a work order, that interaction, what information we give to the customer is critical. They're not very good at that. So we've used AI to summarize the data that's coming out, remote stuff, summarize the data of the system, and summarize their comments so they can just speak into their phone, and then it will summarize that into a work order and all the information. They can just do a quick edit and do that. That kind of stuff helps a lot because it provides better service to their customer. It streamlines what they're doing. I think there's a million of those things that we can do, and this thing has tremendous capability. The only other question I have, John, and it was kind of where you're going with this, is what I don't know is how much this is going to displace our current services, where customers can do self-help. That's the bigger question than in my mind, because my belief is technology will evolve and make it happen. Right now, you saw in the survey, none of us are doing that, but it's probably because it's that basic question. But what will the market do? The market will do what the market does. That's what I always say. You can't stop it from happening. So what will really evolve? That's the bigger question on my mind.
We had a question in the chat, Gerardo. I'm just going to bring it to light here in the interest of time, and it was around the pressure from you talk about this monetization journey, and we're doing less hands-on work with some of this autonomous delivery capabilities, and the remote environment, obviously they don't see that person come into their operational environment. So do you think that is what is it, a mental barrier to hurdle in terms of the monetization journey? Or how are you what sort of friction are you encountering on the monetization journey? And is that less hands-on approach impacting that negatively?
Yeah, I totally know this question. It's the resistance is usually internal. You get in your own organization. It's afraid that, how do I give money back? Our local sales team and that kind of stuff is what we saw early on there. We've seen quite the opposite, actually, when you get in to automate that process. And what I mean by that, though, we've changed our approach significantly. We used to, remember, I told you sell preventative maintenance and you sell reactive services. We changed our selling structure to sell outcomes and focus on the KPIs that need it driven. How does so it's a focus on more the output of our customers versus the potential savings or the help on that. And that changes the strategy. And it's a different discussion completely and a different output. So you got to change your approach too that goes along with that. And you're focusing on the value to your customer, not just how you operate. And that's how we've overcome that. And it's quite the opposite.
I think shifting to that idea of outcome-based results, not the amount time spent, right? The amount of uptime, the amount of things like that, right? If you're anchoring to those, it's key,
yeah. And if I map that to our findings from this year's KPIs and metrics, one of the KPIs that lost the most significance was customer self-resolution, which was a little bit surprising given the capabilities. One of the ones that gained the most traction was service contracts attach rate. And this linked to the outcomes rather than transactional outputs, I think is a big reason for driving that attach rate and that tighter relationship between the service team and the value that the customers are getting. But one of the complexities that comes up, and there was also a question on this, and how do you keep your teams up to date with, you talked about the information that they have for troubleshooting and triage that has made a huge impact, Brad. How are you able to keep them up to date with what is in the knowledge base and build a trust to leverage it?
I don't know if I'm going to be great on answering that question. We're always training our technicians and our expertise on that. Our knowledge base is the knowledge bases we're moving from, they would go to training or SharePoint sites, or what they would do, they would call a friend. That's a lot of what it is. And that's why I said when we take our AI activity in that knowledge base, they can ask that question before they go do that. And what we're doing is keeping that updated by constantly using our live systems and the live data to tell that how to update that, and using our smartest. Whenever we add something new, we use our smartest people to train the machine and be able to do that. And that's how we're doing it, is just constantly using the data and the data flow to update that structure. But other than that, it's normal business as usual, training, structures, vice versa.
One thing
I would
that's
just call,
interesting,
yeah,
Brad.
go ahead, Chris, please.
Oh, sorry. I was just going to say that a risk for some people, right? Because some might say, hey, AI had perfect use for this. Maybe you can push out proactive engagements to agents and things like that and let them know. One of the I think the benefits and drawbacks of generative AI, right, is that you can let it loose and let it train on ample amounts of data. The problem is you don't have control, right? A scripted control on potentially what's being served back to the end user of this. And so what you'll see is potentially incorrect product information or system information if it's pulling from different sources and one's not up to date as another, right? So understanding if you're building out these mechanisms, where is your LLM pulling from, what's it being trained on, is really important. Or otherwise, it's going to pull from potentially incorrect information, combine a few different sources together to provide what it thinks is the right
Yeah.
information. And so there's a little risk there with that, with it being kind of unstructured data being served back for information.
I
Chris,
agree.
I couldn't agree more. Garbage in, garbage out, right? And so the information platform that you're creating, AI it needs good data in order to be effective. Otherwise, you're going to have hallucinations, and there's going to be all sorts of issues with things that are resulting from it. Gerardo, you talk about this data visualization, and you talk a little bit about the journey of taking data from raw, unstructured through to structured and contextualized. That's been something that we've talked quite a bit about with respect to the service index and things of that nature. Any viewpoints from you?
Just reinforcing what has been said, that building trust along the way is critical, both on is the source data that is informing those analytics, is it accurate, is it sufficiently complete, and then are the processes through which you're drawing conclusions, are those also something that is not just accurate, but that the team is engaged with and feels a part of. Otherwise, it's just analytics that go out to die. And I do have one final question that I would like to get both Brad's and Chris' perspective on, which is, as we've touched on this connection between remote support and field service and how they build on each other. We see in some organizations even the ownership of these activities is falling or is consolidating into a single person, a single organization. Where do you see that going, and what are the trade-offs in managing remote support and field service as either independent or integrated activities? So Brad, I'll go to you first if that's okay.
One, they have to be completely integrated. That's the first thing. Structurally, that's a different piece on there. And I can tell you this, our remote support and our analytics, we originally started at a country level. Every country did that. We still have our local operations are locally in a local country and a local office, and usually a city oriented is what happens. And then we consolidated our remote centers under one structure. We still have organization of the country. We align that into the country organization, but we're running that as one center. And the reason for that is just speed of implementation, and we can move work around the world more efficient. Don't have to build it up the same ways, but it has to be completely integrated. Your systems have to be integrated. They have to look like it's one entity. It can't operate separately. I don't think it would be efficient. I guess certain businesses could, but our business, there's no way.
Yeah. And Chris, what about you? Would you agree with this? And also, where do you see this going forward as this reflects on the multi-channel structure? Do you see one channel, one dominating over the other?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with Brad. And what we said earlier, right? Your customer, your end user, whatever it is, isn't looking at your company as having different divisions, right? It's one organization that I'm dealing with. And I think if all points in that service experience and journey don't reside under one ownership and single thread that has that vision, that has the ability to impact all of it, make calls on the technology being used, the SLAs, training, and so forth, you have a very disjointed experience, right? And it's just not a good experience at the end of the day for both your technicians or your customers, right? In this thing, right? If you have disconnected service units, right? I mean, I think part of the thing you see, I think a lot of people know how sales organizations are disconnected sometimes from service organizations, and then think promise by a sales org it cannot be delivered on from the service side of it, right? Because they aren't, preaching from the same hymnal. And so I think having those things connected is it's almost non-negotiable at the end of the day. And having tools that can work together, operate together for escalations, for warm handoffs, for context setting, right? As you're integrating these services, that's what you need to look for, right? And if you have homegrown tools, can it work with other stuff? You have dispatch tools, is it syncing into other things? So, yeah.
Yeah, no, perfect. Thank you. So I think that's a great way to end. I would agree with both of you. I insist this connection between the channels from a data perspective, from a purpose, the KPIs that are driving the behaviors of their teams is critical. Thank you again, Brad, Chris, John, for your inputs. And a reminder to the audience that today's webinar was recorded. It's going to be available in our website in the different channels, as well as the case studies if you want to learn more from what LogMeIn has provided to us. So thank you all for joining. Thank you for the interaction throughout the webinar, and have a great rest of the day.
Thank you.
Thank you very
Thank
much.
you very much.